Welcome to another episode of the .NET Show. In this episode, we're going to talk about ADFS, Active Directory Federation Services. This is what will allow applications to cross boundaries across corporations and still authenticate and authorize people that are using their web applications using AZMan on Windows Server 2003 today. But before we get to that, I want to give a nice thank you out to all the people at South Africa. I just got back from South Africa Tech Ed, and I had a great time down there. And I'll see you guys next year. And now, let's check in with Erica and the news.
Hello, I'm Erica Wiechers. Welcome to the MSDN News Update. On October 8th, AMD, Dell, Intel, Microsoft, and Sun Microsystems announced the publication of Web Services Management, a web services specification that addresses the cost and complexity of IT management by providing a common way for systems to access and exchange management information across their entire IT systems. By using web services to manage IT systems, deployments that support WS management will enable IT managers to remotely access devices on their networks, regardless of whether the systems are just out of the box, powered down, or otherwise unavailable. Microsoft plans to support WS management in the next release of Microsoft Windows Server and the next release of Microsoft Operations Manager. Intel plans to support WS management in its platform building blocks and will announce specific plans at a future date. On October 19th, at the Fall 2004 VON Conference and Expo, Anup Gupta, Corporate Vice President of the Real-Time Collaboration Business Group at Microsoft, outlined Microsoft's real-time collaboration vision and strategy for integrated communications and announced plans for a next-generation client. Building on the recent success and rapid adoption of Microsoft Office Live Communication Server and Microsoft Office Live Meeting, Gupta introduced the newest member of the Microsoft Office system, codenamed Istanbul, that will provide integrated communications capabilities, including instant messaging, extensible presence, PC-based voice and video, and telephony integration. In late October, Microsoft released the Mobile Application Development Toolkit. The toolkit provides all the resources you need to start building mobile applications for Windows mobile-based smartphone and Pocket PC devices. The toolkit can be downloaded for free, or you can order a copy of the Mobile Application Development Toolkit DVD for a small fee. On November 9th, Microsoft released Halo 2 for Xbox, the long-awaited sequel to the award-winning Halo Combat Evolved. More than 7,000 retailers opened at midnight to sell the most anticipated video game of the year. In New York, Times Square was the epicenter of Halo 2 activities in the United States, where legions of fans lined the streets to get a copy. Microsoft tallied more than 1.5 million Halo 2 pre-orders in the weeks leading up to the game's release. And this has been the MSDN News Update. I'm Erica Wiechers.
Welcome back. Like I said, today we're going to talk about ADFS and how that can take an effect in your writing applications that deal with authorization, whether they're web applications or in some cases smart client applications. To help us focus on these issues, I've got Don Schmidt and David McPherson with me. Welcome. Now, why don't you guys just let us know exactly how you fit into the authorization concepts of an application development, Dave?
Okay, so I'm representing an authorization manager, and authorization manager is an authorization runtimes, a role-based access control implementation that provides a role-based framework for applications to store, manage, and expose roles to administrators. It's a store for multiple multiple applications. It can be centralized to Active Directory or in a grassroots deployment XML model. Right, it's a Server 2003 product that's been backported to Win2K and is available on XP.
So this is a current product people can use today?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Don?
I'm the lead program manager. The product is currently called Active Directory Federation Services. Your clients, people watching at home might have heard of the thing TrustBridge in the past. This is the first product that will ship from this. The whole idea is to extend the current Active Directory and Windows environment, and even other environments, to say, you'll never completely, no customer will completely integrate their environment. It won't be all IBM, it won't be all Windows, it won't be all Unix. It's going to be a mix of things. And today, people in one of those environments need to get access to applications in another environment. They need to authenticate over there, they need to authorize over there, and typically it's done by having to have a local account. Every different place you go to run an application, you have to have a local account and then a password you have to remember, or someone has to fix for you when you forget it. The whole idea of what Active Directory Federation Services is about, or Federation in general, is to say a person can log on once where their account lives, and you can project their personality, you can project their digital identity into that other space, and you can authenticate them, and you can make statements or claims about them that other application can recognize and use as authorization data, like the things that Dave was talking about. He can define a role, and local people can provide some information that says they have the role. We, when ADFS, allow a remote person to come in and provide claims and statements that could authorize them for the exact same role. So we do distributed authentication, but we provide a rich set of claims to extend the authorization across those boundaries, and that's how we plug in and work with Authorization Manager.
No, to me that sounds like this holy grail that we talk about sometimes called single sign-on. Is that what it's trying to do?
Yes, that's one of the things it's trying to do. Microsoft to date has never shipped a web single sign-on product. We've always relied on partners. There's quite a rich ecosystem of partners to do web single sign-on. We recognize that we're not trying to go in and just compete and say, okay, now finally we're going to do our own web single sign-on, but it's this idea of saying, we give great single sign-on as long as you're within a Windows forest today. It's the best single sign-on experience there is. But what happens when you have to go across a border? That border might not even be another company. It might be a different department that's running a different software. Or it might be somebody you just acquired. How can you get web single sign-on from one Windows forest to another forest, or perhaps even to a completely different platform environment? So first of all, yes, it is web single sign-on beyond the borders. But it's then, with web single sign-on comes, well, if I have to sign on with a second account over there, oops, it's no longer single sign-on. I had to sign on a second time. So it's a combination of the single sign-on experience and federation across boundaries. So it's both.
Mm-hmm. And it also sounds slightly similar, especially we're talking about just a Windows world in general, of what Passport was doing. Passport was allowing us to take, and I could log on to Starbucks and to other companies that were using Passport as authentication, and I just had one single sign-on I had to do, and I could actually go from site to site to site in that fashion. Is this the same concept as Passport but better, or is it am I missing something?
No, it's similar. In fact, it's the same technology. The Passport is moving to the same federation technology. It's all. So I'll step back for just a second. The technology that ADFS is based on is basically the WS security set of specifications, or Indigo. I know you've talked about Indigo in the past. So WS Federation, WS Trust, WS Security, that set of specifications is what the technology is based on. The primary difference that you would find between the Passport model and what we're doing and other business partners are doing, Passport posited there would be one large account store out there, or maybe just two or three big large account stores out there. Turns out that many customers don't want to do that. They don't want to give up control of their own clientele, but they'd like to be able to let their clientele go get resources at somebody else's services base. So what ADFS allows is it allows lots of places that have a customer base to federate with other places and let their clients cross the boundaries, get the same single sign-on experience that Passport did, but each sort of site gets to hold its own customer base if it chooses to, rather than having to give them up to a central repository in the sky. That's the fundamental difference.
So that means I could go to some site like Amazon, for instance, and have a very strong relationship as a user with Amazon, create an account there, and because they're using, they're not using Windows today, and because they're using a technology that would work with ADFS in the future, that means they could then go to any ADFS site and allow me to have access to resources in those sites as well?
Eventually, when you get to active clients, that kind of sort of chaining and referral would be more reasonable. Today, it's more likely that with web browsers and applications, that you using an account from someplace, an example, perhaps you have an account with your telephone or your ISP provider. And if eBay, or Amazon chooses to say, oh, you know, you don't have to have an account with us. I recognize Bell Telephone, Southwestern, I recognize, you know, Mindspeak, whatever. I will let you log on to me and I will understand who you are in terms of that account that you already have established somewhere else. Okay. That is probably the first type of things you'll have happen. In the corporate world, you'll see, so like Microsoft, we're partners with Boeing, we're partners with IBM, we're partners, you know, with all sorts of businesses. When I want to go access an application and a resource at that other company, I will be able to just log on at Microsoft as Don Schmidt and be projected as somebody they know and can authenticate and trust over there without having to have a second account. So whether it's personal use case or whether it's business to business, that will be the same model. But in both cases, it's a matter of federating where people have accounts as opposed to creating one big account repository in the sky.
That's what we want to maybe back up a bit and just kind of discuss the issues around authentication and authorization, which are really, you know, two different concepts that applications, whether the website applications or smart client applications, need to be concerned about. Because on one hand, you're authorizing or authenticating a person to understand who they are from a credential standpoint. On the other hand, you have authentication or authorization. See, I still get confused myself. Yeah, authentication, credentials, authorization, allowing them access to resources. And that falls into more of understanding what role they play in the company, what groups they belong on, and stuff like that. Overall, as the Windows platform, server and client, how do we deal with that? How do people understand dealing with authentication, authorization, whether it's a web app or a smart client application?
Well, traditionally, right, they're pretty well hinged. The authentication would happen either through NTLM or Kerberos, resulting in a token. That token would contain their groups. Then those groups would be given permissions on resources through ACLs. Around the server 03 timeframe we kind of unhinged that, allowing authorization technologies such as Authorization Manager to query the user's capabilities or permissions or groups out of Active Directory, and unhinging those without that being a result of the authentication process, right? So unhinging that allowed for things like Authorization Manager to really be written in, or to work in a general way, such that the underlying authentication, whether it's PKI or Kerberos or NTLM or some store and forward model or a forms-based model, really freed up the authorization model to really support any of these underneath, right?
Now, is that a looser connection than trusted domains, or is that the same sort of concept?
It's certainly looser. For example, some customers who are trying to mitigate, you know, degrees of trust into, say, DMZs, are coming up with SSL-based secure channels in order to communicate, you know, traffic back and forth. And once the user identity has been passed, you know, to the backend service, given this framework, we can get their Active Directory group information and you know, their application roles without having this degree of trust that we traditionally have had to have. Now, currently, the work involved in doing that is a bit much, although there are features, kind of unknown features in Server 03 that made the degree of trust very configurable, such that you can configure trust to a particular service and so on. So yes, it has definitely unhinged or has lessened the degree of dependence on the NT trust.
It's interesting, though, Robert, to go back to your first statement, because a lot of people don't make a distinction between authentication and authorization. I mean, we do because we live in this space, and they mean very different things. Authentication is just proving that I'm Don Schmidt. Some authority, whether it's my Windows, you know, NTDev is the forest and domain I'm a member of. So they vouch for me and say, yep, it's Don Schmidt. Okay. In today's world where there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of applications and peoples, you don't want to determine what Don Schmidt can do just based on my identity. That would be way too many endpoints to manage. You'd be managing every individual's user's access to every file and every application. So we invented groups and things like that, nice metaphors of indirection to say, I'll term the permissions in terms of this little indirection as one group or set of groups, and then I can populate, I can add and remove people, and it's easy. And that's kind of where the classic, most of the platform, and Windows distributed authentication authorization within a forest, or between trusting forest, or between trusted domains, is extremely powerful, does a great job of it. But what we're finding is in the next generation of applications, and as people's, the barriers, the virtual network and all this, of talking about the people in one organization having to have access to line of business applications in another organization, you can't just base it on that structure of groups. All sorts of claims. And so one of the new buzzwords is rich claims authorization data. It could be anything. It could be your title. It could be a project you're working on. If you're in the military, it could be a security clearance. It could be a division of the military. It could be special weapons training. I mean, all sorts of things about you are claims and statements that, yes, you're the one person, but all this other data authorizes you to do a particular function. And so we're moving into this rich claims definition. AZMan and role-based, they opened the door. They introduced another way of sort of thinking about how you would authorize, and we're just running through that door with the whole federation and rich claims model to say, look at all this information. You've got it in Active Directory, you've got it in your HR databases, you've got lots of information about your people. How can we collectively pick it up and give it to applications so they can make the access control, the authorization decision? That's again where we come together.
Well, how do we pick that? I mean, it sounds to me, all this rich information, suddenly this what used to be just a Kerberos token I was passing around and holding out to people, suddenly has this big gigantic chain of XML data store that's also got a so it's like, 25 megabytes go on when I just want to take and have access to a single GIF file or something like that.
Well, I suppose it could if somebody went rampant and crazy with the policy. What we've done today, and this is, so again, I said Active Directory Federation Services, we've worked with a number of other partners, web single sign-on vendors and platform vendors in the WS Federation space. There's regularly there's Federation workshops, and what we're doing for the first round is we agreed on a SAML, Security Association Markup Language token. It's based on SAML 1.1, and their terminology, they call it an assertion, is a cryptographically signed data element that can be used to authenticate a particular user and then add some statements. They call them statements. We've been seeing these kind of security tokens for a long time. An X509 certificate. It has a statement about the person. It has a statement about the issuer in it. It has a public unit, and it's cryptographically signed, so you can't tamper with it. You can believe what it says. So these new security tokens are just variations. The SAML is just another variation of that classic cryptographically protected way of moving digital data about a user through the system. So all the vendors, we agreed upon this particular SAML variation. We support 3 types of claims. We can say, who are you? Your identity, user principal name or email name. What kind of containers are you a member of, groups or roles, the classic group or role concept. And then custom claims, any name value pair, again, like your title, your weapons training, your security clearance, your social security number, your age, whether you're a purchaser or not a purchaser, whatever kind of statements you might have to make, these get bundled up into a SAML security token. They're signed, and then they're simply sent via the WS Federation protocols. Web browsers, it's just classic gets and redirects and posts that carry this information. We provide an agent on IIS v6 web servers that understand that SAML token, and we recreate a full security context on the web server. We can create a context in terms of existing impersonation and ACLs with just a small amount of information. We can present claims into Authorization Manager and feed into their role-based decision making. We can support ASP.NET. They have a very lightweight is and roll call. Or we can just, if it's a new wave of applications, I want to know all this data. I want to go play with it myself and mix it up maybe with some more things that I know locally before I make the access control decision. Or before I go on and call some other application in terms of both the user and who I am as an application, well, then we just expose the whole set of claims. So it's not a simple answer to the question you're asking. We can shovel across a single identity statement that says my email name is donsch@microsoft.com, and we could shovel across an awful lot of data, very, very big token. That's where intelligent administration and policy comes into play. Kind of long answer, but it's not a simple, discrete question.
Well, I mean, it's a complex topic, I think, and which is part of the reason why it's taken so many years for something like this to come out, because this sort of technology doesn't exist today on any other platforms, does it?
No. There's several of us vendors that are in parallel producing it. There is a more limited variation that only focuses on web single sign-on, primarily between large websites where there are products out there in the market that do it to that extent. but there is nothing on the scale of what the WS Federation specifications are about, because as we talked about, the first version of the product that my team is building is primarily focusing on what's the crop of current clients, browsers and applications, web applications. That's what's most exposed on the internet. But what's coming and what's already being built is the whole generation of the web services, the Indigo based on SOAP and XML messaging, and the second version of our Federation services will support that. There is nothing in the marketplace that can do both, the immediate browser and is going to be able to extend to that full SOAP aware. There's nothing like that. We're building that technology. Some of our partners are building similar technology. We have demonstrated interoperability to date at the level of passive clients. We are having ongoing workshops to demonstrate interoperability at the level of the next generation of active clients.
And when you say passive client versus active client, what do you mean there exactly?
Primarily, a passive client is a browser. A browser, as you know it today, which cannot make any intelligent decisions on its own. If you point it at a site and the site needs you to get something else, either it has to tell the user to go follow a link, or it issues a 302 redirect in the browser and goes and follows it to another site. There's nothing smart about it. An active client is primarily something that is SOAP aware, message oriented. An active client could actually go in the richest sense, could go to a web service, to an application site. It could read a policy and say, oh, that's the operation, or that's the resource I want to get at. And the policy says to do that, I'm going to have to provide a token issued by some local authority that this application knows and trusts, and here's the kind of data I'm going to have. I'll now go to that local authority and say, okay, I want a token that looks like what I just read on that policy. What do I need to, I'll read your policy and find out what I have to give you to get that token. Oh, now I can go back to where my account lives and I'll ask for the right kind of token, and then so the client can just figure this all out and sort of move itself through the system.
So where today on the web, what happens is the user gets posted these different forms, and they got to type in here, and what do you got to
Yep.
And then that's when they hit the close button to just kind of get away from the whole thing.
Yes. Or they either hit okay, sometimes when they shouldn't, or they hit the I can't deal with it, or I'm not going to register at another site. I don't know what. Yes.
Yeah.
We're really going after that whole space to fix it.
Now, what is the breadth of the application landscape that this might address? I mean, Boeing has a lot of internal applications they're developing, and they might be having partnerships with McDonnell Douglas and Rolls-Royce and Pratt and Whitney and stuff like that. Microsoft said we have partnerships with IBM and so forth. There's that business level application connectivity. What other sorts of applications can benefit from this whole authentication authorization, whether it's through AZMan or through ADFS?
So for AZMan, the place where we see the biggest impact are line of business applications. So any corporations writing internal apps, such as an expense application or in a company store sort of application, or an insurance claims adjuster application and so on, right? These guys are big, relatively sizable dev projects, and they need to, there's not an off-the-shelf product for them. They write a custom app for it. They have roles in their organization. They think in terms of capabilities, right? These fall out of job descriptions very often, right? Or they're closely aligned to organizational charts. So they translate those roles into application capabilities and put them into their line of business applications, right?
And what do you see for the future of these types of applications? I mean, are we going to take and see these ubiquitous through all apps, like with something like Notepad, be using AZMan and ADFS for doing this sort of stuff?
So purely client applications like Notepad aren't really in the business of managing access to resources. They might do smart things, as authentication clients, but in terms of authorization, they're really not in that business yet. Down the road, as you get into rights management, perhaps there will be room for that. But right now, they're, in the case of Notepad and similar apps, they're not doing that yet.
Yeah, the classic authorization today, I agree with Dave, is primarily performed on the resource side of the application or the server side of the equation. It's up to the client to provide proof of who the user is, and perhaps provide the data that's making the access control, but access control is still enforced at the server side. That said, we're seeing that at least the landscape, all of the types of line of business applications that both of you just mentioned certainly are completely amenable and enjoy federation, because line of business apps increasingly have to be exposed not only to your own employees, but to traveling employees, to your business partners, sometimes even to your customers, certainly to your supply chain. So all the line of business applications that used to be closed and inside are increasingly be exposed to people who do not live on your network and who do not have accounts in your Active Directory or whatever, you know, your LDAP store is, and who are not even employees of yours. So that whole space is open, but also the personal use on the internet too. The same technology. We're gonna start working with, you know, I mean, things like today, the phishing attacks that are out there. You're constantly prompted, you know, your bank account is under question. Please give us your ID and password and mother's maiden name and social security. We'll make sure your account's still in good order. Thank you very much. You know, so we're trying to make it safer just for individuals to use this technology as well for their own personal applications. So it's not just locked, while it's very, very good for the business landscape, it's not locked only into that space. It's amenable to the personal activity on the web as well.
So it affects the people at home that aren't even part of an individual corporation.
Yes.
And stuff like that. Now, our audience is probably kind of a little bit confused perhaps by this point of exactly what the difference is between AZMan and ADFS. So maybe we could spend a little time kind of discussing, you know, why do we have these two different products and what is the reason? Is there a reason of focusing on one rather than the other, or does it make a difference?
So the AZMan is about the back-end resource authorization decision. It really came from, you know, right after Windows 2000. We observed that our ACL model wasn't very popular amongst developers, and applications weren't, even Microsoft applications weren't using it prolifically. So that, plus what we saw going on in the web access management space, you know, we saw people actually liking third-party authorization solutions, right? But by far, most of them are writing their own custom authorization models.
Which then means they don't really interact with other authorization
No,
capabilities
so
at all.
the administrators have to learn a different authorization model for every application that we sell or that they buy. Also, the features in the OS aren't getting used, like stuff like auditing and group expansion. Groups, you know, they're re-implementing groups in SQL and so on, right? So clearly, this is something that the system should be providing, right? And given that the ACL model, you know, either because it wasn't exposed, but later because it was a little bit more than most apps needed. It just wasn't getting used. So we saw that there was that need, but we also saw at the same time that there was you know a desire for federation, but at that time was WebSSO, right? It was the burgeoning WebSSO solution.
WebSSO.
Yeah, web access management, in the cookie-based single sign-on solutions. And so we kind of split the solution into two parts. And the WebSSO stuff, you know, took more time due to the kind of the federation and the WS star specifications that they had to reconcile with, which allowed the RBAC model that we were working on, Authorization Manager, to proceed and get into Server 03. So there's overlap, right? It's the Authorization Manager is the RBAC model that applications can use in the WebSSO solutions, right? But it's incomplete in terms of a WebSSO or a web access management solution without the ADFS authentication management.
And so the ADFS then picks up from where AZMan leaves off, or what?
Well, actually, we come in ahead of it. We come in first. Yeah. It's worth going back a minute to our earlier discussion, excuse me, about Kerberos. So today, if you just look at a Windows forest, we have an incredible single sign-on experience. You sign on to your domain join desktop once in the day, and you hit your file servers and your Exchange mail server and the web servers, and you hit your SQL databases and whatever application we want inside. I never sign on again. And seamlessly what's happening underneath the system is that the Kerberos subsystem on your desktop computer and the Kerberos subsystem running on the KDCs running on Active Directory are saying, oh, new target. We need a new authentication and authorization token called a Kerberos service ticket. It just goes off and requests it because you're authenticated. Both are recognized by the system. And Microsoft is going to continue to invest in that system because it's very powerful. And we've got various vendors who have extended so that Unix machines, both Unix workstations and Unix servers, can just drop into a Windows forest and get the same benefits of being like a member effectively of the domain. and the user can get a single sign-on experience using Kerberos, and the Unix-based applications can actually recognize data coming out of Active Directory to make access control decisions. So Microsoft is going to continue to push that because it's extremely powerful, extremely useful. The problem is, it's like the world was flat and there was an edge and you could fall off of it. Well, so we created something called Forest Trust. If you had two forests, you could bridge them together. The problem is it required completely native mode, 2003. Every domain controller had to be upgraded, and it required a very complex set of holes in your firewalls. And customers said, I'm not willing to do that with every other place that I have to transact business. Or what if, in fact, it's not even a Windows Forest? What if it's a WebSphere environment? How do I get this extension of how wonderful Kerberos and all this authentication and authorization data is in my island? How do I project it into another island in a meaningful and useful way? That's where ADFS steps in and completes it and says, it was working fine within here. We don't need to change that. But when you've got to project it and get it to another island, that's where we can authenticate that user and we can pick up very rich claim data about the user, project it into the other environment. It might be a Windows environment. They might map it into a local account called a shadow account and impersonate it and do a standard ACL check. We might pipe it into AZMan, and now remote external people could get the same type of role access control into a line of business application as the local employees of that company could. So that's where we step in. We sort of bridge the gap between the closed, perfectly wonderful Kerberos environment and how to project that information into another environment. And regardless of where we project it, our favorite target is plumbing into AZMan, because that's the power there, the flexibility. What we do is we don't make an access control decision. We give you the data that says, yep, this is Don Schmidt, and here's the data. You figure out what you want to do. AZMan makes it easy for you to figure out what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and AZMan is carefully designed such that it doesn't care whether it comes from a token or a certificate or SAML claims from ADFS, right? So that's really where the two technologies kind of hook up and relate and together provide the solution, the end-to-end solution, right? So yeah, we are kind of talking about both this authentication trust kind of solution that ADFS provides, and then we're also talking at the same time about the role-based access control in the applications, right? But it's really just because together, finally at last, these two are coming together to solve a problem that we've had for some time.
Okay, so I mean, it's kind of like if I were to take and write an application today that used AZMan and didn't even think about ADFS at all, when ADFS comes out, suddenly my application is capable of having a slightly expanded role because now I have new capabilities coming out because I'm not even aware of the fact that people come from outside my current forest.
Yeah, you'll take care to do that. In Service Pack 1, we're going to introduce some of the interfaces for ADFS that are needed. What they will do is allow for claims of various types to be added to an authorization manager context in the form of a role or a group. Right. Applications that are aware of that and they're aware of the SAML claims can write those in Windows Server Service Pack 1, Server 03 Service Pack 1, and they'll be set up for ADFS. Yes, they will require very little, if any, change.
It's basically in our demo app, it's a one-line change. Read these new claim types, add them to AZMan context, and everything you were already doing with AZMan just works now for external people you never even knew existed. That's what we like about it.
Simple.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sounds like we've done a fairly good job of covering, what the role is, no pun intended, of these products and how they're going to work in application frameworks and stuff like that. Probably the next stage is actually, take a look at maybe what some of the code and application potentials are. So why don't we take a short break, and when we come back from the break, let's run through some demo, take a look at some sample code, and maybe further discuss how an application can utilize some of these features within their environment once we actually have some things on screen that we can take a look at and point to.
Great.
Good. Thanks.
So after this short break, we'll be back and take a look at some demos. Don and Dave will join us back again, so stay tuned.
We ran from them. They followed. We thought they'd never find us. We were wrong.
I will continue my campaign against the humans.
No enemy has ever withstood our might.
Chief, we're running out of time.
I need a weapon.
about Halo. Even the hierarchs do not understand.
There are those who said this day would never come. What are they to say now?
Rated M for mature.
Big crowd here this morning.
Happy Halo Day.
It is nuts. The line is just so freaking long.
Halo 2! We're getting Halo 2!
How's it going?
You're nuts. Go play your game.
Yeah! I got the Halo column.
Welcome back. Now, I know I was, a little bit confused on authorization, authentication, AZ-Man, ADFS, and what all that stuff is, and I figured that probably the best thing to do is actually sit down and take a look at some demos, some pixels on screen that help you see some of the code necessary to write applications that use AZ-Man and then eventually use ADFS, as well as seeing what the results are for an application that's actually using those. And back again, we have the David and Don show to help show us exactly what's going on here. So now, for the programmer that's sitting down as a computer and he wants to start writing some AZ-Man code to start handling authentication in his application, how difficult is that? What does it take for the developer to think about? Is it a big, complex structure? Does he have books and books and books he has to read? Or have we designed it such a way it's actually easy?
It's pretty easy. Yeah, there certainly wouldn't help or hurt to take a look at the docs, right? But there's a white paper that's available that walks through it really nice. Mm-hmm. Most web pages with an authorization decision take probably about 20 lines of code tops, and that's if you use some of the advanced features. So yeah, it's pretty easy. Mm-hmm. Authorization Manager is written in COM because it needs to be used.
And wait. This is the .NET show.
I understand, but in this case, we provide an interop assembly.
Okay.
For the managed world, but we also have to work in places such as IIS that aren't quite managed yet, mm-hmm. right? So
it means like even existing MSC application or an ATL application could interact with this stuff.
C++, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So why don't we just take a quick look at one of the demos and just kind of see what this means and how to take and use this. Maybe the types of applications that actually work best with this sort of stuff.
Okay. So I have a demo here.
Okay.
That is a example web expense application that any company might have. If you take a look at the UI here, and this is the Authorization Manager UI that comes with the system. Right? This is an MMC snap-in. You can see here I have an expense web application opened, and in it I already defined a couple roles: submitter, approver, and administrator. Right. So before digging into those and what they really do they kind of imply what they do, but we'll look at the actual capabilities. We'll show an example of somebody trying to use this expense application by bringing up a run as window of a user named Bob, who's a consultant, just getting back from a trip and wants to expense his lodging. So there's a little compile time there. So Bob finds out he's not in any roles. So what we did here was we found out, hey, this is Bob. Did a quick get roles for Bob, and there weren't any. So we just reported to Bob they didn't have any roles. Go see his manager. So let's take a look at going back to the Authorization Manager UI. Here's the policy for this, and I'm currently using the XML store. This could also be Active Directory or Atom. And looking at the submitter role, we see that there is somebody in it, Mary, but not Bob, right? So before we grant Bob access to that role, let's take a look at what it means. So that role is going to be defined in the role definitions container, where we see that it has a task called submit expense. This is a simple role. It could have any number of tasks. In this case, this task which is defined in terms of two operations called read expense and submit. And this level of indirection allows for both the fine-grained access control available with exposing low-level operations, but also the simplicity of coarse-grained access control. By exposing only or the concepts the administrators need to understand. They don't always need to understand that in order to do one high-level activity, that might involve 20 low-level operations, right? So the task abstraction allows for a simpler administrative experience there.
Plus, it looks like these are also custom-defined tasks associated, like, read expense. That's not going to be a generic task that's going to be assigned at a schema level, but actually the people that are trying to design this tool have decided, okay, I want to take and call something read expense.
That's right, and it could really be anything. With the model here is that the application will identify what the operation is and validate the access prior to executing that operation, right? So they could tie together multiple back-end resource managers if they want and manage them all at a middle tier, right? And just as long as the service application has the permission to do them on the back end. Mm-hmm. So in addition to these two operations, we also have a rule, a business rule. And this here is written in VB script. It could also be written in JScript. But what this does is this is something a deployer or an administrator can use to qualify a permission, a task, or a role, such that it can use either runtime state or something that's available to the application, such as the expense that's being requested, or something like time of day, or maybe a SQL query that determines whether or not somebody is a good customer, right? So in this one, what we're doing, and we're setting up the return parameters and stuff, but the point here is that we're going to grab a parameter called amount, and then we're going to compare that amount to the value of 500 and see if it is less, we're going to return true. So the administrator can say, oh, in this case, it's saying you can submit an expense, but only up to this amount.
So and like today, that'd be the sort of thing that if I was writing an expense sheet on the web page itself, I would need to have code that looked at a particular value, and if that value is over a certain amount, then return that back.
That's right.
Whereas now you're actually defining this very low level.
Yes.
And now any web page that needed to access this, as long as Bob had a certain amount of expense he was supplying, he would automatically accept that.
That's right. And that's kind of why this is so powerful and allows us to have the flexibility that will bring along ADFS as soon as it drops in, because the application developers write the code to the operations. The deployer or administrators can then configure those operations into tasks or roles as they want, but the code is written to those operations. So just so long as the administrators will come and design their roles the way they want them, the access checks are all going to be done against operations, and nobody ever has to recompile an app just because they want to change the authorization. Right? So now let's give Bob the submitter role. So in this case, we're using Bob's Active Directory account, and going back to Bob's web page. And since this is user mode, it doesn't necessarily require a log on and log off, right? So whereas back in the token days, if you wanted to manage groups or get a new group into somebody's token, that usually required a log off. So now Bob is in the submitter role, and we query his capabilities, and we see that he can submit an expense. So let's do that real quick. So as I said, he's going to submit his login for $500.
Or logging, as the case may be.
Firewood.
It's the Northwest. Well done. Cut her own way.
Oh, wrong date. Sorry. Note that he puts in $500. And he's denied. Now, this is that business rule that we talked about working. So Bob remembers that he has a limit of $499, so he simply does it again, and he's allowed, right? Now, let's go take a look at the code that we used to do that. I have here trusty notepad running. This is the code for the submit button that I just clicked. And this section here is the setup for that access check call. And note that these are features that I'm showing off here that that I have to set up that others may or may not use. The first thing we have to do is create a client context for,
Did you
for
highlight
Bob.
that so I can?
Yeah, and that's this right here. Right, this is where we have a variable where we're storing Bob's client context, or the client's client context, and we're simply getting it out. Then we have to identify whether or not we're using a scope. Now in this, a scope is an authorization manager feature that allows partitioning of application resources so that you can apply different roles, memberships in different places. In this case, it's all about expenses, and we're not using a scope, so we just set it to the empty string. The operation array we set up, in this case we're using one operation, that's the submit op, so we identify that. And then this is where we bring in the business rules, where we determine the expense amount, and we compared that to $500. In this case, the first parameter going into the business rules array, or to the business rule name value pairs, is the amount. We're also sending in the date and the username, and this allows a business rule author to use any of those values in a business rule. Right, so anything that the app might consider interesting, it could throw in as a business rule parameter.
So the author of this ASP code had to understand that business rules are coming into play and make sure that he was properly sticking the values from the form into those business rules elements.
Correct. And in fact, it's actually a contract. An author that wanted to leverage the business rules would make sure that they publish to their deployers and administrators that these are the variables that we're going to give you for use in business rules. Right?
Steve, you didn't explain that it's not required, right? Visuals
Absolutely
are
not,
optional.
yes. Yeah, they're absolutely an optional feature.
But in this case, since he's using the values on the form as part of the authentication mechanism or authorization mechanism,
That's right.
Still get that confused. He needs to take and use the business rules for it.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so these are setting up the names. This is setting up this section here is where I set up the values. So then we just call the access check method, right? What we have here is a little bit of audit data. So what this does is it allows us to decorate our audit log with a little more application intent. So currently in the audit log, if you're used to looking at audits, you usually don't get this type of stuff. You get low-level bits about read, write, read control, that sort of thing. So this lets the application describe to the administrator a little high-level information. This is where we specified the scope, and again, this was the empty string, the operation, which was submit, and then the biz rule name value pairs. And we have some additional parameters, which I'll leave off, but they allow for you to throw in COM interfaces. So we call that, we get back an array of a result. Since we could have asked for more than one permission, we'll get back a yes, no on each of those that we asked. Right? In this case, we were only asking for one, so we just check for that one. Right? Which we do right here. So then one more feature to demonstrate here, and this will start to tie in what we mean by claims. So we have we have a manager, Mary, who's going to come along and approve Bob's expense. So she, having just been promoted, goes to the expense application, and she can't approve an expense. So she has to go back and ask the administrator what's going on.
You're saying that she can't approve an expense. Why? I'm not seeing anything on that screen that says she can't approve an expense.
Yeah, so I'm pulling up capabilities. I'm checking the role-based policy to see their capabilities, and I'm drawing UI with those capabilities. Right?
So the fact that I don't see a approve outstanding expensive things means that Mary hasn't been set up.
Well, I know that. All Mary knows is that something's wrong, right?
Right.
So she tells her administrator that she can't submit approve an expense yet. So we go back and look at the authorization manager policy, and we look at the approver role, right? And we see a group called managers. And then this is an LDAP query group. This is an authorization manager feature that looks at the user's Active Directory attributes to determine whether or not they're in a group. So there's no static membership. This is just a dynamic group. So looking at that group, we see that the LDAP query is a check for the title attribute being equal to the string manager, right? So with that, we can go check what Mary's title is in Active Directory users and computers. And the organization tab has this information, and she's still a sales rep.
Sales rep, authorizing expense reports.
That's right.
That's the wrong person. There you go.
So now Mary's been promoted. back to her web page. She refreshes. And now she can approve an expense, which she does. Now note that this is going to use the same access check logic to verify that she can she's in the approver role, right? And we could use more biz rules and so on to put on a limit, right? So this is all available in Windows Server 2003, and it's available on XP for development, available on Windows 2000 via download from the web, right? In Service Pack 1, we're going to add some interface features to be ahead of R2 so that we can support the mapping of the SAML claims into roles, which Don will talk about and demonstrate.
So now that you know what ADFS is going to look like, you know how to take and make sure those are set up so that applications can evolve properly to use ADFS when
That's
the time
right.
comes. Now, what are we seeing people specifically using this for? Mostly for internal apps like we see here?
That's right. Yeah. Well, the place where we're seeing the uptake is in line of business departmental applications. So the web expense forms, insurance forms. There's some banking applications where people really have conceptual roles, right? And they need to manage those roles from the capabilities of those roles, from some role object. So that's where there's a kind of a need for role-based access control, and where there's not off-the-shelf solutions that they can just they can pop in. So these are the places where we're seeing strong growth of strong use of the authorization manager.
Okay, thanks. Don, I understand you've got a demo that shows us what ADFS is and how
Right.
that links into what AZMan can do for us. Why don't we take a look at that?
So we'll pop this open, and I'll show you coming at remember we talked about the fact that ADFS comes in ahead, and so I'm not going to really show you so much in the way of code as show you how this information is manipulated and delivered from one site to another, and then at the end we'll show you the AZMan application and watch the behavior change. Simply, the roles are already defined, the system is in place, and just as he did with his users, when people's attributes in their account store change, the system just interprets the new claim data and gives you new capabilities.
Okay, let's take a look.
Okay, so like I was saying, I'm going to show you first more an administrative view of how all the plumbing works before we get, and then we're going to end up back in an AZMan application at Trey Research and show you all the things come together. So first of all, though, to give you some context, I'm going to be basically representing two different companies here. ADatum is a computer manufacturer, and there's another company, we'll show you the screen in a minute, Trey Research, which supplies components, memory chips and other components that you would use in building computers. You asked about the application. This is an example of a line of business application. Trey is a supplier to ADatum, so we're going to have the ADatum purchaser trying to actually get at an online purchasing application that's hosted by Trey and actually order some materials. But before we jump right to that, I'm going to give you, and this will be brief, and I apologize to the user, it might be a lot, but I'm trying to give you a quick sense of what ADFS is about and this power of what we mean by sending rich claims across these boundaries that we were talking about in the earlier segment. So first of all, if we look at something, there's a concept of the federation server, or it's called a security token service. This is basically a service that is an adjunct to your account stores, to Active Directory, and it can generate the claims, it can create the SAML security token I was talking about, which can be then carried across to another trusting entity. So basically you have one site that will generate one of these tokens and sign it, and you present it to a different site that trusts it, can verify the signature, and then decide what to do with the claims that were in that token. That's the basic arrangement here. That's what we mean by federation. So if you look quickly,
there's got to be some level of trust and knowledge between them.
There's some level of trust, and basically today it's primarily through some exchange of an X509 certificate. That can be, today we'll support self-sign, we'll support obviously the Microsoft Search Server, or some third party like VeriSign thought. It doesn't matter. You're not required to have a PKI infrastructure in place, but you have to have at least the ability to recognize and verify a signature of some partner you trust.
And that's a signature of the partner, not of the individual.
Not of the individual. There's no need. That's the whole point. If you had to authenticate every individual user, you'd be right back to the same problem all over again. Instead of passwords, you'd be trying to store and validate certificates for everybody. It's, I trust a partner. and I trust my partner to make certain statements about my partner's employees. And that's the only trust level I need to arrange. It's up to me to decide what I want to do with those statements. And I'm going to show you at the end of this demo how we plumb them into AZ-Man and use the exact same role-based authorization mechanism he just displayed in terms of these claims that came across from a completely different company, a user in another company that the application never heard about, never anticipated servicing, and suddenly it will just start servicing that person.
Maybe this oversimplifies things a bit, but what came to my mind was thinking that today, in today's model, where I log in and authenticate myself with the Microsoft domain, and I'm doing stuff, and I'm on a web page, it's getting information from me. That web page has gotten authentication of I am who I say I am, and then it's wanting let's say it's wanting my social security number, it's wanting my current medical number or something like that. I pull it out of my wallet and I type those numbers in. What you're saying we're doing now is taking that level, and we're taking the company and turning them almost into a person, and the individuals at the company are more like the pieces of information in my wallet. So now we've got an Uber authentication model that these different companies have agreed to work from, and then they then trust everything, implicitly everything within that, because the company is the one that's providing that information up.
Yes, I would never have thought of quite of that analogy, but it's accurate. It does work. Certainly the product could back off, and it could be just me as an individual representing things about myself too. I mean, it's not limited, but in a corporate, enterprise to enterprise federated, you've got it correct. You are trusting the corporation to speak on behalf of its employees, its users. You're not having to bother to trust the individuals. This is very important for a couple of reasons. One, do you want to have to try to be responsible for keeping track of what your partner's employees can do? The fact that they're promoted, demoted, they're in a new job, they left, they're on vacation? You couldn't possibly track that. Worse yet, what do most people do today? I want to let you into my shop. I give you a local account. How do I know what happens if you get fired? You still have an account to come into my place. You're still an authorized user in my system. There was a recent survey by some particular company, an auditing firm, and they found they had more than 100 really dead, I mean, literally dead people still were in the system with live accounts. I mean, you don't know. When you're just creating accounts for people in external populations, you have no idea what they're really capable of. You don't have any idea whether they should still be there. And this system is meant to push that back on your partner. When they can't log into the partner site, they can't get into your site. Done. It's that simple. So you've got the right model.
Okay.
So basically, this is, again, a datum. This is the manufacturing side. If you look inside the Federation, our policy is in terms, and I'll go quickly, we have this concept. I talked earlier about the SAML security token and something called claims. In SAML parlance, the token is called an assertion. Claims are called statements, but it's the same thing if you know the SAML. So a claim is a statement. We support 3 types of claims. We can support an identity one, like email. We can support, as I said, a group, a container type thing, which is we just call group. And we support custom claims, which are name value. Now, obviously, these are just types. They're like any data type to a programmer. You got to have some real value. Where does the value come from? Okay, so all that's necessary to program at this point from an administrative point, again, is the types of claims. What happens is when a person really authenticates and asks for a token, if you go and look here, we're using Active Directory as the store. So now if we look at the email claim, and if we look, how's that? Oh, well, that's the mail attribute. That's the LDAP attribute in Active Directory. And that's how that one is populated. If we look at like some of these, looking here at a group claim. So we had this group claim called Purchasing Administrator. Well, what is that really populated? That actually, in this particular case, is populated by the fact that the person really is a member of a real Active Directory group called Purchasing Admins. Could possibly with some other code, you could have a title, you could have a different attribute, and you could populate this. But by default, we can take an Active Directory group, which is Purchasing Admins, which is meaningless to Trey, and we can map it into this group claim, which is meaningful to Trey. And then likewise, we can go down to something like a custom claim. And the nice thing to do there is, okay, so we've got this custom claim. It's called position. How do we populate it? You saw an example of him doing before with manager and sales rep. It's the title. Okay, so we've got this title and LDAP attribute. We can look it up. We can put it in a custom claim and send it across the wire. So we have this concept of the whole set of organizational claims, all sorts of claims. This could be a long list that this ADFS has decided that they need in working with different partners. Now, I only want to talk about Trey. Okay, Trey is a resource partner, or they have it. What do I actually send to Trey? That's what I've agreed. I've done this out-of-band key exchange, and I've agreed with the administrator at the Trey side. The two of us figured out what applications do my users need to get at Trey, what claim data is Trey going to need about my users to make the access control decision. This is all. We want to know who they are, like their email name, okay? We want to know if they are an ordinary purchaser or an administrative purchaser. We want to know things like, what's the spending limit? And the fact that they're an employee of ADATM, and that's pretty much what's necessary, okay? What level of access do I have to give you the application? Who do you work for? What company partner do you work for? And what's your purchasing limit? And that's all that Trey really needed.
And so if you had other partners you were actually working with as well, you'd see them underneath Trey at that point in time.
No, you would see,
but
you'd see them here, where you see resource partners and there's Trey, then you would add your other partners here, because they might need a very different set of information. It's highly unlikely that any two partners are going to want exactly the same set of information. And even if they want the same set of information, they might want it named differently.
Yeah. So maybe one of the partners you're connecting up with was like a Reuters news feed, that all it was allowing the people in your company to access Reuters news.
Exactly.
It'd be their email name and maybe the company name.
That'd be it. That's all we necessary. Say, yep. And there might be some kind of classification of the type of news. Are they allowed? If it was a different, like LexisNexis, are they allowed to actually see legal briefings, or are they just allowed to see the public reports? You could be but it could be as simple as an employee and the user, so we can audit and say, yeah, this person looked at this article. We have to pay them 2 cents for reading the article. Could be that simple. So that was the ADATM side. Very quickly, if we go over here and we look at the Trey side, they likewise have a federation server. So this is where the online ordering application is, and they have their concept of claims. They have their concept of partners, okay? So look, yep, and here's their counterpart. That's the same set of claims coming in.
Now, I suppose one thing to point out here is that what you're showing here are 2 different instances of virtual PC running. And so you've actually got, essentially, even though we're just seeing one desktop and what looks like 2 different applications pop up, these are actually 2 different total PC environments that you're bringing up. One is being ADATM, and the other is being Trey Research.
That's a good point. I usually remember to make that point. Thank you, Robert. So, yes, in fact, this is not just 2 desktops. This is 2 completely separate Windows forests. 2 totally separate Windows installations with their own Active Directory, their own DNS, and basically a virtual internet between them, just in terms of local networking configuration. And what we've looked at is, I was like Bob, the administrator over at ADATM, managing his relationship, and now I'm Sam, the administrator over at Trey. We're managing things at the level, still at the level of the partner relationship, the ADFS relationship. We haven't got down to the level of AZ-Man yet, sort of setting the stage. So the only thing that's interesting here is that, yes, here's all these claims coming in, but if you notice right up here, Trey is actually doing a transform on the ADATM claim. What is this? Well, different people buy different amounts of stuff from us. The more you buy, the better a price I give you, the better a discount I give you. So they're actually doing a transform, and this is something for demo purposes we just manipulate here, but typically this would be a plug-in module, would do like a end-of-month sales report, and would say, oh, so this month, ADATM bought this much. Yay, we're going to promote them to the platinum partner status, and they get a bigger discount. And the system would just run this thing, and next month, ADATM would come in and get transformed to a different discount category. So there's a lot of power. This is not just like static sending things across. Both sides can decide how to populate these claims. Both sides can perform custom transforms. Because if you were to go and look, if you were paying close attention, you might see that, well, so on this side, Trey is hosting the application. They want to see a claim called administrator, because that's how their application is written. If I go back and look at ADATM and show you what they're sending to Trey, okay, so they're sending a claim because they had to agree to Trey to their application, but internally they don't have anything called administrator. They have a claim called purchasing administrator. So the system can say, oh, we're not going to have to change the applications and change code at each end, because we all use different namings, different ways of classifying these claims, these statements about our users. Let me just translate it here. It's just an administrative translation, no code. So it's a very, very powerful system. And then you go back to Trey, and then you look and you say, okay, so here's this particular application. It's the ordering application, and here's all the possible claims that might go. And if you look here, well, we're not even using all of them. This particular application is only using the ones that are enabled. So you have the ability. This is where we're starting to get closer to AZ-Man. It's the set of claims I'm going to generate on the ADATM side are going to be submitted to the Trey research side, possibly transformed, translated some more, and then some set of them are going to be funneled down to the application, and that's where we'll connect in a minute with AZ-Man. So now that we've very quickly, and probably bewildered the audience a little bit, I apologize, but it's hard to do quickly, as we're going to go look now here.
This is why administrators are paid big bucks, right?
Yes, why they're paid big. But the nice thing about this is that the administrators can go and set these rules, and they can walk away. They can go on vacation, and the system will just sit here and follow the rules. And we're going to see this as Eric changes, just like the people in Dave showed earlier. As their situation changes, the system interprets it without writing new code. That's the power of this thing. So Eric, he's an employee at ADATM. He's just joined the purchasing department. It's his first day on the job, and his boss says, "Hey, oh my God, we've got this new run going. We're short of RAM. You got to go buy some memory. Trey's our supplier of RAM. Here's the link. Here it is, right here. The Trey research. Go buy some stuff. I'm going to need gross of blah 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 whatever chips. Go buy them." Well, of course. What happens to new employees? You think that everything's in place the day they start work? Not very often. So he says, oh, great, I'll go here. I'm going to place my order. And what's going to happen is Trey Research says, well, Eric, I know who you are. I know that you work for ADATM and that I trust you. But you're not authorized to do anything here. You're nobody to me yet, except as an employee of ADATM. You're not authorized to actually operate or access my purchasing application. So just like in the past, Eric says, oh, bah humbug, go call my administrator. What the heck happened? So if we go back and we now just look at, oops, a little bit too, we want to, that one down, and look at Active Directory and say, okay, so we can look here in Eric, and if we go look at things like, well, let's look at the purchasing department. And let's look at the members. Eric's not a member of it. So if we were to add...
No one's a member of it.
Nobody's a member of it right now, yes. It's a demo. So we're going to make... Eric is definitely a member of it, so we just, HR basically now, granted him the membership. Okay. So now, if Eric goes back and fires up this application and goes to place an order, says, hey, boom, as simple as that. Being granted. And what that actually did is, if you can scroll all the way down to the screen, here's claims. Before, well, his email claim was going across, and that gold local claim that was being transformed, we saw those were there.
Which was assigned to ADATM.
It was assigned to ADATM. Had nothing to do with Eric. Those were there, but what was missing before is the purchaser. Now, all of a sudden, because I added him to that group, now the purchaser group claim came across, and without writing any code or doing any other modifications, the application opened up the purchasing capability. So let's go buy a...
Plus that wasn't something that Trey had to do on their end. It was all something that ADATM, having hired Eric, didn't quite fulfill stuff they needed to do. And
exactly. The classic hire fire type scenario. The rules were in place. The application was in place. Trey didn't change. The application didn't change. ADATM didn't have to change their business relationship or anything with Trey. They just got the data about Eric in Active Directory current. Just brought it up to date. Suddenly all the rules fired, and he could buy stuff. So, fine. Life is good. So now, if we step back here for a minute and we go back and look one more time, let's say, well, Eric has been doing such a good job. He's been buying lots of stuff. He got a big discount last month because he figured out the right, how to cross over the point. So let's promote him to, a member of the purchasing admin. There's no members there either yet. We'll add Eric to that one too.
Very exclusive club.
Very exclusive, He's a legend in his own time. So now Eric is not only a purchaser, but he's a purchasing administrator. So this time when he goes back, and if you, there we go. If you go look, oh, look at this. There's some administrative. The application opened up even more. Again, no code change, no administrative changes. All we did is update Eric's basically employment records back where he lives. So no changes on Trey. Trey is Trey, this is the point I was making earlier. Trey, this could be Eric, this could be Sally, this could be Tom. And they don't care. They care that he's an employee of ADATM and that he's a purchaser, or that he's a purchaser and a purchasing administrator. I care and I trust ADATM to make those things. So I'm not going to trust Eric or Sally to claim that for themselves, but I trust ADATM knows who their purchasers are. They better, or they've got a lot bigger problems, right? So that's how it worked. And the reason this opened up is if we go down and look. Now remember, now there's yet another claim. The administrator claim came across. So all these claims came across, and this has all been, we're all seeing at Trey an AZMan application. So if we go here and we say update the billing codes, and we look and say, oh, yep, voila, updated. Well, let's try updating the department code. You know, I'm going to change that to 3-4, whatever. It says, oh, not allowed to perform this. So let's now finally show you something you've already seen. Let's go look at Trey, and let's go look at the same screen you saw Dave running before, because this, in fact, is an AZMan-based application. It's totally based on it. And if you go look at the administrator definition, and you say, oh, well, look at that. Change billing info, that task is allowed to this particular role. Well, let's go and get that other one up there, and let's add that.
Did you click on the checkbox?
Oops, I didn't. Yep. Thank you. There we go. Right?
Yep.
And as Dave pointed out before, since this is all client side, I don't really even have to log off the application. I was logged on. My claim of administrator was there. All I've done is change the responsive side, the AZMan definition of what's allowed. So now if I try to do this, aha, see, it's fully working. So what we've seen is we've seen an AZMan application that first of all said you can't do anything because I recognize you as Eric, but not as a purchaser. As soon as the purchaser came across, the UI came up for purchasing. As soon as the next claim came across for administrator, we saw the administrative functions come up. But in fact, the UI was a little more permissive than the actual role definitions have been. The UI was painted saying, oh, administrators can do all these things, but the actual operations were not fully empowered. So that's what we just did in AZMan. The code to, to plumb this.
And note that he didn't have to change the code.
Yeah.
He just went into Authorization Manager, added an operation to a role, and the app did the rest. By asking for access to operations, the app doesn't have to be updated in terms of changing role permissions.
And the interesting thing, so before you saw Dave, defining who was allowed to be a member of a role or, has permission to exercise the role in terms of like local groups and things like that. Well, this is basically the heavy lifting, the huge amount of coding that the application had to do to take the claims from our SAML token and to add the appropriate group claims into the AZMan context, and then all the definitions were in place work. So right here, basically, we expose this concept of a claim collection from the SAML token. The application has to read the claims out, and for each one that is of type group, it's basically adding it into the AZMan context is what it's doing. So it's as simple as doing that. If you go down inside the application.
But essentially you're saying this is a AZMan ASP page that they simply added that one line of code to it in order to allow it to also take advantage of the ADFS stuff.
Exactly. Now, there are places in there where, in fact, I'm not going to bother to go through all the code. They've looked at individual claims to decide, how am I going to paint the screen? Because you saw the screen expanded, again, based. So that was all done with AZMan 2, saying, oh, this, based on this role, I know the role of the user based on the claims that came in. Therefore, I know what screen to paint. And those two operations you saw, change the billing department, change the building code and things like that. Those were the access check calls, exactly like you saw him describe before. Scoped, here it is. This is what's being requested of the operation, and you either have the role or you don't. But all of the beauty and the power of this was the application developer, his administrator, they don't have to know about ADATM. They don't have to know about the fact that Trey probably supplies 100 or 1,000 other companies. They don't have to know anything about those companies and their people. They simply write their application once, whether it's their own internal people running it or some trusted partners getting access to it. They write the code and they're done with it. It's the power now of taking ADFS to move that information in a secure way across the border and tie it into AZ-Man. That's where our two technologies really come together. So I hope this is kind of like, now you see the end-to-end picture of why it works. And I will tell you, I can't give you a name, but a huge customer who recently saw this demo said, if you guys can actually deliver, really, these things we're saying, the senior architect says, I want to mandate this as the paradigm for all internal application development going forward for our company, because this will solve the problems we've been struggling with for ages.
But now, as you're describing the process, one kink comes to my mind, and that is, let's say I'm a developer inside of Trey Research developing this little order sort of thing like that. In order to make sure that I get those claims that I'm expecting to get, I've got to actually communicate that up to the upper level administration to make sure that they expose that properly in what they're asking from ADATA, which simply means that the left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing in order to make sure this information is coming across. Is that right or not?
Almost. I think yes, the left hand and right hand have to know what they're doing. Trey certainly has to let ADATA know what claims they need. And certainly the Trey administrator has to know what claims to pass on to a particular application. But the application developer, he develops in terms of his or her operations, tasks, and roles. And that doesn't change. He does not have to, or she does not have to understand anything about whether that's a local user being defined by a local query group getting membership, or those groups, either the named roles or the groups that grant permission to them. How they're generated is of no concern to the developer. We've just introduced a completely new way to generate the exact same information from a user in another universe. The developer doesn't have to know anything about that, doesn't have to change a line of code.
Except for making sure he follows the guidelines. So let's say I'm developing a site and I realize, hey, I need to get approval for this purchase order sort of thing. Gee, I've got access to the whole entire Active Directory data store. Gee, I've noticed that the building number, people in building such and such, those are all the administrators, so they have purchasing power. So I'm just going to look at the building number to get this sort of stuff. That's not going to fly. He's got to make sure that the upper level people that are managing the schema of the employees and stuff like that, he's finding out from them what the correct way to look for this permission is.
That is correct. That's absolutely correct. You can't make local knowledge definitions of roles. I mean, the whole point, Dave, of role-based is to it's a level of indirection. It's a way of saying, I've got these constants and I don't want to lock them down to something as crazy and local as they're all at this IP address, or they're all in this building, or they're all named Bob or Eric. No, you don't. You're right. That would be a bad thing.
Which I think, even despite this, I think it just creates better communication within the company, which I think is a good thing. And so this just enables that sort of information passing.
But note that we have that today if we're using groups, right? If somebody's put in a group, that there might be a 2-week digestion period, or a few days. And if somebody's going to be taken out, there's a few days there as well, right? So the synchronization from the golden store to the application is going to be an issue. And these features, which allow for flexible interpretation of those attributes, actually help close the gap, because instead of us having to synchronize some HR database and then pushing it into multiple places, we can write rules that go right back to the HR database and read it there. So you're right. Whoever's in charge of those attributes about the user does have to make them fresh, right? And the applications have to know the degree of freshness that they can trust before they start trusting it. But added flexibility here will enable them to make them even more fresh, right?
Now, we've talked now about both AZ-Man and ADFS, and we've mentioned that AZ-Man is available today on Windows Server 2003 and backwards capabilities for Windows 2000 and stuff. And we mentioned that ADFS isn't quite there yet. What can we say about timeline for ADFS and when that can be available, and what people should be doing today to be ready for it?
I don't get to ask how much would you pay for it?
Okay.
So what we can say is that there is certainly been public announcement of a release called Windows 2003 Release 2 or Server Refresh, internally called R2. This is the current release vehicle for Active Directory Federation services. I caution people that names at Microsoft change until the last moment of release, so it might be called something different by the time it comes out the door.
You might rename it Dawn or something like that.
Well, I don't know. Dawn, yes. Cool, but I'm not sure it would mean anything to people. Might be called Access something. It might be renamed differently. They're still playing around with naming because marketing likes to do that. But the point is, it is currently slated to ship with this Windows Server 2003 refresh, which the published and announced beta 1 dates are December, I think it's December 6th was the date I saw of this year, 2004. There is a TAP, the Technology Adoption Program, which has already been announced to the field. Nominations for customers to join this program and experiment with the R2 refresh of the operating system and with Active Directory Federation Server. Nominations to join that program are already out and being considered. We did a private technical preview with our closest and dearest customers. We had 15 customers, some incredible military and government and high-level business customers come in for a 2-day training course back in September. So we've got people out with special drops of the code, playing with it in-house, verifying that it does what we think it does in live environments. And the targeted releases of R2 is fall of 05. So beta 1 is now here in December in 04, beta 2 is early spring, and the TAP people have made statements that if there are customers who have a really engaging business need and need to go into production earlier than the official RTM, they will support a limited number of customers in that. So I see availability of people can be playing with ADFS and in concert with AZ-Man as early as December, on beta quality code. And, by late spring, early summer, some customers may likely be in production. And it'll be full quality, released to manufacturing by fall of 2005. And that's just version 1. This is like we were talking about primarily, so I should make the distinction. Maybe it's clear to you, but not to the audience yet. This is around passive clients. We had that a little bit of discussion earlier on. So this will support web browsers and web applications like you've seen here. This was always a browser was my client. In parallel, we and partners are working on the next generation, the next step up of the Federation, so aimed at web services, not just web applications, and active or smart clients. By a smart or active client, I mean something that's SOAP aware, something that can speak SOAP messaging, the XML data structures, and I talked about how it could go around and read the policy. That will be coming, in another year or two after the release of the passive. But definitely, coming to a theater near you soon, we're going to have ADFS web applications working with AZ-Man as you've seen today. And we've got customers already experimenting with this technology.
I mean, time-wise, sounds like right now is the right time to be paying attention to it if it's going to be out by next fall.
Yes.
Because that's not an awful lot of time from now. Yeah. And so in the meantime, the most important thing then, I suppose, David, is they should be paying attention to AZ-Man, because we saw there that the bulk of the code in that application was AZ-Man code.
Yeah, so today, Don's app and my app both, queried the capabilities of the client. We looked at what roles they have, and then we can dig deeper and say, well, what tasks or operations can you do, and then simply paint UI based on that. So you're safe, right, in code to those operations and capabilities. It's going to be a relatively small, switch to pull in the ADFS WebSSO object and map the claims into the client context. You saw his code do that. It's going to be a relatively easy tweak, and yeah, you'll be ready to go.
Okay. Now, if someone wanted more information about both AZ-Man and ADFS, where's the best place to go for that?
Microsoft, at least for ADFS right now, certainly we have a white paper published. I don't happen to have the URL and things in front of me right now.
Well, if you give me the URL, I can put that in the transcript.
Okay.
And so people just go to the bottom of the transcript and all the things we've been talking about. I'll put a bunch of links there.
Right. With this, the technology has been demonstrated to the field that it was, there's decks available from TechEd. There was MGB. For Microsoft field people, they're on Demos R Us. Also, I will send you a link. This demo is up on Demos R Us, so anyone in the field can see it, walk through it with a customer. So I will send you the pointer to that Demo R Us information and to the white paper.
So likewise for AZ-Man, there's a white paper up there. You can go to TechNet and search for AZ-Man and white paper, and you'll find it. I'll get you the transcript. The SDK is just full of AZ-Man stuff, demos and so on. So there's stuff available online.
Especially since AZMan is shipping today, it's in your your current SDKs and stuff like that. All the information you need.
And the Windows 2000 version is on the download center.
That's actually a good point to remind the audience too, is that ADFS, we have basically 3 components that are new. We have this federation server, which you should see in the administrative console. We have a proxy that does various things for browsers, like if a browser was coming in over the internet, you saw me logging on as a person who was a domain joined machine. If Eric was a mobile worker, he would have to log on either using SSL client auth and a certificate, or he'd be prompted with a form. He'd enter his corporate ID and password. So I have a proxy. If there's any kind of UI that has to be displayed, the STS doesn't bother with that. The proxy handles mediating with the down-level clients that need that sort of massaging, and an agent that has to run on the web server, where we were taking the SAML token in and talking to the AZMan application. Those 3 components must run on the server Windows 2003 refresh operating system. Those 3 components. The entire rest of your infrastructure can be Windows 2003 or Windows 2000. We run equally well in a Windows 2000 Forest or a 2003 Forest. So ADFS will support all the environments where AZMan is already shipped.
Okay. Now, are there any final last words you think the audience needs to understand about AZMan, ADFS, authentication, authorization, trade research?
So I'll just point out that do use, or try to leverage the system. Take a look. If you can get auditing for free, that's worth looking at. You can get the Active Directory groups and attributes integrated for free. That's worth looking at. There's a lot of work there involved in getting those security features right, and obviously it's good to leverage the system where possible, right? The biggest issue I see is that there's so many different implementations that administrators you have to relearn the whole paradigm every time they go to a new application.
I mean, one place they go to just makes an awful lot of sense.
Yes, and having one paradigm to learn, right?
Yeah, and having that controlled by the system, that's where it should be.
I think from my perspective, what I'd like the audience to make sure that if they take away one thing is that this is not a rip and replace. This is not a forklift upgrade and, oh my God, I've got to change all over again. They say, we've just demonstrated your Active Directory, Windows environments, Windows 2000, Windows 2003, AZMan applications written in your Forest or some partner Forest, the stuff that you're writing and running today. The whole purpose of ADFS is to say, how can I connect those islands together? If they're different companies and they're just not willing to fully trust each other, but they only want to open some applications to each other under certain conditions, bam. We suddenly just take all that infrastructure that works so smoothly and so nicely inside, and we extend just the pieces of it you want across into another space. And that's the message. This is not a rip and replace. We're changing the world. This is taking that really well-oiled machine, the Windows and Active Directory and the Windows application platform and AZMan role-based authorization, and simply saying, oh, I can expose that to a wider audience, and I don't have to redesign my apps if I've done it right the first time. I don't have to change my infrastructure. I just put this edge mechanisms in place, and suddenly my partner users as well as my own internal users are getting access to my line of business applications in a controlled way, and I'm still in control of that way.
Control. Well, all like being controlled, don't we?
Yeah. But I don't have to manage my partner's users.
Yeah.
I'm in control of my apps, but I'm not responsible for managing my partner's users or keeping track of their hired status or reinstating their passwords.
Okay, well, I think we've covered it pretty well then. Thanks for joining us. I hope we give our audience a really good insight of what ADFS is going to provide them and what AZMan does provide them today and how they should be focusing on that.
Thank you. Good.
So hopefully these details allow you to understand authentication, authorization, ADFS, and AZMan properly, so you can take and start writing applications within your organization today that start using roles and groups and allow them to leverage ADFS when it comes out in the future. Thanks for joining us.
With me today is Grant Blaha-Eroth. He is manager of the Microsoft Center for New Technology. Grant, welcome.
Thank you.
So why don't you start by telling us what exactly the Center for New Technology is and what it does?
Well, Center for New Technology, it's a 12,000 square foot facility. It does training and provides guest offices for visiting ISVs and system integrators and large enterprises.
So how does an ISV get to be invited to such a place?
Oh, well, they usually are participating in a TAP program or an early adopter program, they got nominated by field evangelists. They're usually doing something very interesting and very cutting edge.
So can you give some kind of rough examples of the kind of projects that they work on while they're there?
There are C++ porting projects for the next version of C++. It would be. And there are projects going on involving SQL Server 2005 and just general C# would be type projects and 64-bit porting projects going on.
Okay. And so you said there's like office like setup so that they get to come in and kind of replicate what they're working on back in their companies, and do they get support from Microsoft while they're here?
Oh yeah, usually they're engaging in some problem and they're working mostly at their own facilities. You know, and these are large. These could be large companies or sometimes they're very small. But whatever it is, they're on the cutting edge. And invariably, because they're working with bits that are maybe not even in beta yet, maybe not even what they call an alpha state. Maybe they're working with bits that haven't been released to the rest of the world yet. There are problems, and so they come on site to work out some of those problems, and the development teams, they get feedback as to, they find bugs in the process, and they see how the users actually, how the developers are actually using the products.
Right, so both sides benefit. The ISV gets help with their project, and Microsoft gets to see the beta action.
Yeah, and usually they're doing it because the next release, like Whitby, has so many cool features in it that they're dying to use all these great features, and so they're willing to go through the pain to achieve what they want to do. I mean, and the kind of people that come, they're not afraid to do new things. In fact, probably in their companies, they're fighting these incredible battles about going forward with technology, and so they get to come to the Microsoft campus, and what we try to do there is help them and also make them feel like they're not the only person in the world trying to achieve the impossible.
Okay. Yeah. And so how long does an average ISV stay? How long does the projects take in general?
The stay is usually sometimes just 4 or 5 days. You know, they come, maybe some companies come once a month. It depends on what they need. Other companies have been known to stay for 2 months, 3 months.
Okay, wow. And so as a manager, what exactly is your role with the center?
I try to keep everything running. I'm constantly trying to upgrade the technology there. I work with a lot of sponsors like Intel and HP, and we're constantly trying to get the latest processors in there. And we're getting equipment in that doesn't exist in the outside world yet.
So you have the latest and greatest little playland at your fingertips.
Oh yeah, it's really a fun job.
That's great. Have you been doing it for a long time?
I just started July.
Okay.
So not that long.
You're brand new to Microsoft.
Yeah, I was an ISV before I came to Microsoft. I'm a chief software architect at a consumer software company. And so I guess when I was working with the TAP programs and working with Microsoft, I realized that Microsoft, unlike in the past, they were kind of very aloof and distant, and now the new Microsoft is very approachable, and I met a lot of really cool people. And so I explored getting a job with Microsoft, and I'm really glad I did. It's a lot of fun.
So now you've seen both sides.
Oh, yeah.
That's advantageous.
On the outside and on the inside. It's really cool.
And did you have to move to the Seattle area for this job?
Yes, I did. I moved up from the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay. So how do you like it here so far?
Weather
aside.
Yeah, it's just the weather's different.
Yeah.
The people here, they're a little nicer, I think. They kind of stop to let you through the stop signs.
Huh.
You know, in fact, most of the traffic gets a little confused because everybody's trying to be polite to let everyone through the stop sign.
I have noticed that the California drivers are a little more aggressive.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That's a learning curve. So what are some things you like to do outside of work?
Outside of work, let's see. I really like to write electronica music. I do it all on the PC. I do have a small keyboard, but I kind of got away from that, and I do it all visually. I write the notes and play them back and play with simulations of synthesizers, analog synthesizers, and things.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Are there some electronica bands or artists that you get some inspiration from?
Yeah, there's a band called Orbital, and very similar name, Orb. They're very good. I also get inspiration from a lot of other places, a lot of like psychedelica bands from the 60s, you know. And I also like, you know, movie soundtracks too. They also give me a lot. There's a lot of experimentation. What is electronica? It started in maybe in the 60s, and it's sort of grown from there.
Are there some specific soundtracks that you like a lot that you can name?
Yeah, my favorite soundtrack would have to be Merry Christmas, Mr. Lawrence by
Oh, I don't know that one.
Ryuichi Sakamoto.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll
it's a
look
great
that up.
movie, and the soundtrack is just fabulous.
Oh, great. I'll have to check that
Yeah.
out. So are there other things that you like to do or things you've discovered in Seattle? Like, are you an outdoorsy type person?
Well, I used to ride a mountain bike. I haven't had any time since I got here. It's just
Right.
the Microsoft, you know, you're new, you got to work really hard. But I come from Marin County, and that's sort of where mountain biking was born. And so I kind of done a lot of it. And, up here, though, there's just beautiful trails. It's gorgeous. You got mountains here that just, you know, make most of California mountains look kind of sad.
Right.
Sad
Hopefully
in
when your
appearance,
work
yeah.
calms down, you'll be able to explore that more.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to summer again. I can get out there and ride.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what's some of the, what's the most surprising thing you've found or something you didn't expect working at Microsoft?
Just how big Microsoft is. I remember going to process my I-9, and I kind of forgot my identification. So I go to a place to meet the representative, and they have an entire floor of people. All they do is process I-9s.
Wow.
An entire floor. I was like, never had I seen anything so big before. And it just boggles my mind how much goes on at Microsoft all the time. It's like a little city.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like its own world.
Yeah.
That's great. You can work here for years and years and still just not know what every team is up to.
Yeah, but I'm in a place where I get to see everybody.
That's true.
I'm starting to find, you know, every part of the company seems to come into my little building, Building 20, in the Microsoft Center for New Technology.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, Grant, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Well, thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the .NET Show.
And stay tuned for the next episode on Business Application Platform Initiative.
See, you didn't mess it up.
I didn't.
And until then, we'll see you on the web.